Welcome back to the deep dive. Whether you are prepping for your next massive week-long backcountry adventure, or you are an ultra-distance athlete staring down the barrel of a 100-miler, we're really thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because today, we are tackling a deeply specific, universally understood dread for anyone who spends serious time off the grid. We were talking about battery anxiety.
Oh, the worst kind of anxiety out there.
Right. I mean, imagine you're at hour 80 of an endurance race. You're exhausted. You are navigating unfamiliar terrain in the pitch dark. And the absolute last thing you need is to look down at your wrist and realize your primary navigation and pacing tool has just turned into a dead piece of glass.
It is a genuinely critical issue. For the endurance crowd, a watch is no longer just a passive fitness tracker. It is a lifeline. You are relying on it for your topographical maps, your altitude data, storm alerts, your pacing strategy. When that battery drains to zero halfway up a mountain pass, you aren't just losing your Strava data. You are potentially compromising your safety. Your entire expedition, really.
Which is exactly why today's mission is to decode the staggering technology behind Garmin's solar endurance watches. We are talking about the specific devices that literally display an infinity symbol for their battery estimate.
Which is still wild to think about.
It is. And to understand how they actually pull this off, we have an incredible stack of research today. If you want to look these up yourself later, our first source is the5krunner.com. So that's www.the5runner.com. They provide these phenomenal in-depth engineering breakdowns of Garmin's battery architecture.
They do really great work.
Plus some incredibly practical gear reviews like their Seeking Infinity article. We're also pulling heavily from dcrainmaker.com, www.dcrainmaker.com. If you know anything about sports tech, you know them as an exceptionally thorough and rigorous reviewer of Garmin solar tech.
Yeah, the level of rigorous testing from both of those sources is essential here, because achieving infinite battery life isn't just a matter of stuffing a larger lithium-ion cell into a watch case.
Right, because you can't just strap a car battery to your arm.
Exactly. A watch is constrained by the physical size of a human wrist. You can only make the battery so big before the device becomes completely unwearable. So the engineering challenge is entirely about efficiency and energy harvesting.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the journey to infinite battery life actually starts right on the surface of the watch with a crucial engineering choice. And looking at the data from our sources, the gap in performance based on screen technology is absolutely massive.
It really is night and day.
Just to put this in perspective for you, the 5K Runner notes that an Apple Watch Ultra 3 gives you roughly 14 hours of continuous GPS recording at full accuracy. But a Garmin Enduro 3 paired with solar, it offers up to 320 hours.
Yeah.
We are going from 14 hours to 320 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, why is there such a colossal difference?
The foundation of that 320-hour figure is a display technology called MIP. That stands for memory in pixel. It's a transflective display. This is a massive departure from the AMOLED screens you find on the Apple Watch Ultra, or even on Garmin's own Fenix 8 AMOLED models.
So what's the fundamental difference there?
Well, an AMOLED screen operates by having every single individual pixel generate and emit its own light. It looks beautiful. You get those deep, inky blacks and vibrant cinema quality colors. But from an engineering standpoint, generating light is incredibly expensive.
Expensive in terms of battery.
Right. Every second an AMOLED screen is on, it is aggressively pulling power from the battery.
I see. So an AMOLED screen is actively fighting the ambient light around you. If you are out in the blazing sun on a trail, the screen has to pump out even more light just to be visible, which drains the battery even faster.
Precisely. MIP technology flips that entire paradigm on its head. Because it is transflective, it doesn't fight the sun, it uses it.
Oh, that makes sense.
The screen actually reflects ambient light back through the display panel to render the image to your eyes. The brighter the sun gets out on the trail, the easier the watch is to read, and it requires zero extra power to do so.
That is so clever.
But the real magic of memory in pixel, and where it gets its name, is how it handles static information.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I was wondering about that. Even if it's reflecting light, the screen is still active, right? It's still showing data.
It is showing data, but an MIP display only draws electrical power when a pixel physically changes its state.
Wait, really? Only when it changes?
Exactly. Think about what is actually on your watch face during a long run. Your heart rate might fluctuate, changing a few pixels. Your distance metric slowly ticks up, but the vast majority of the pixels on that screen,
Like the background, the borders.
yes, the borders, the static text labels, they are not changing. Because those pixels have memory, they hold their state without requiring a continuous flow of electricity. The display is essentially idling for milliseconds at a time between data updates.
So while an AMOLED watch is constantly sipping power just to keep a static image illuminated, the MIP screen is basically asleep until a specific number on the screen needs to change from a 2 to a 3.
You've got it.
That totally explains the baseline endurance. But let's move to the magic word that actually gets us to that infinity symbol, solar. How does this device actually drink the sun while you are running?
The evolution of Garmin's solar architecture is a masterclass in iterative engineering. It really started gaining traction around 2019 when Garmin acquired a French photovoltaic specialist company.
Right.
In what we can call their Generation 1 solar tech, which you would find on models like the Fenix 6 Solar or the Instinct 2 Solar, they used a dual zone approach. They had a highly efficient 100% solar ring around the very edge of the display, and then a semi-transparent solar panel layered over the entire main screen.
Remember looking at those Gen 1 models? That semi-transparent layer over the main screen allowed about 90% of the light to pass through, so you could still read your maps and your data. But it operated at a pretty low efficiency, roughly 10%.
Yes.
And it had a very specific look to it, right?
Yeah.
It gave the entire watch face a persistent, slight reddish or brownish tint. It wasn't entirely crystal clear.
That tint was the physical compromise of placing photovoltaic cells directly over a display. But when Garmin moved to Generation 2, which they implemented in the Fenix 8 Solar and the Instinct 3 Solar, they completely re-engineered the approach.
What did they do?
They realized that sacrificing screen clarity with a transparent panel wasn't the optimal path. So they completely removed the solar cells from the main display area.
Wait, let me make sure I understand the math on that. They reduced the overall physical surface area of the solar panels by taking them off the main screen entirely. Doesn't that mean they are harvesting less energy?
You would think so, but it is actually the exact opposite.
Really?
By moving the cells to the bezel, they could use significantly higher density, higher efficiency photovoltaic materials that aren't constrained by needing to be transparent.
Oh, because they don't have to be see-through anymore.
Exactly. The result is that the Gen 2 bezel-only array actually pulls in up to 5 times more solar power than the previous generation's full-screen approach. Plus, you get a completely unobstructed, crystal-clear view of your data, all protected by their unscratchable power sapphire crystal.
That is a brilliant pivot. But the sources bring up a really crucial point about the physical reality of wearing a solar panel on your arm. A solar panel on the roof of a house works perfectly because it is angled directly at the sky. A human wrist is a completely different story.
What's fascinating here is the sheer physics of energy harvesting on a moving body. It is incredibly complex. A traditional solar cell produces its maximum electrical output when the sun strikes it at a perfect perpendicular 90-degree angle.
Right, which never happens on a run.
Never. When you are trail running, your arms are pumping back and forth. When you are mountain biking, your wrists are gripping the handlebars, usually angled horizontally. Your watch is almost never pointing directly up at the sun.
And the data from our sources points out that this isn't just a minor drop in efficiency. If a solar panel faces sideways relative to the sun, the energy output plummets. It drops to roughly 1/6 of its maximum potential. So how does Garmin counteract the fact that my wrist is constantly moving in the shadows of trees?
They solve it mathematically using something called MPPT, maximum power point tracking.
Maximum power point tracking.
This is an algorithm typically used in massive commercial rooftop solar grids, and Garmin miniaturized it for a wearable device. Because the watch is curved and constantly moving, the voltage and current generated by the solar cells fluctuate wildly from millisecond to millisecond.
Because the angle is always changing.
Right. The MPPT algorithm continuously analyzes these fluctuations and dynamically adjusts the electrical operating point of the cells. It ensures that the power management unit is extracting the absolute maximum available wattage at any given microsecond, regardless of the terrible angle the light might be hitting the watch.
So it's constantly hunting for the optimal power draw. But let's ground this in reality. Garmin's official benchmark for achieving unlimited battery life on these watches requires 3 hours a day at 50,000 lux.
Yes, 50,000 lux.
And for you listening, 50,000 lux is bright, but it's not the surface of the sun. Imagine standing in a wide-open field at noon on a cloudless summer day in somewhere like Ohio. It's very bright, direct sunlight. It's not the 150,000 lux you might experience at the equator, but it's substantial.
And we need to clarify a very common misconception about what this solar tech actually accomplishes. Wearable solar is not designed to rapidly recharge a dead battery. The solar input is measured in milliwatts.
So I can't just take it off and lay it on a rock.
No, if your watch dies on the trail, you cannot just set it on a rock in the sun for an hour and expect it to jump back to 50% battery. What the solar array does is offset the active power draw in real time. It acts as a tourniquet.
A tourniquet, I like that analogy.
It stops the battery from bleeding power while you are actively using GPS and navigating.
Though, to be fair to the raw capability of the tech, the 5K runner did note in their extreme testing that if you leave the watch completely stationary, powered off, pointing perfectly at the sun for 14 to 16 hours in 70,000 lux conditions, you might recover roughly 20 to 25% of the battery.
Right.
So it is physically charging the battery, just at a very slow rate.
Exactly. But ideally, it is on your wrist doing its job. Which brings us to the other, arguably more important half of the engineering equation. It is one thing to efficiently harvest a few milliwatts of solar power, but that only results in infinite battery life if the watch itself requires virtually zero power to function.
Right. So what does this all mean for the internal hardware? We have to look under the hood at the invisible power savings. How are they stopping the power from leaking out?
This is where Garmin's hardware design becomes incredibly ruthless. Let's look at the processor transition. They move from older chipsets to the NXP IMX RT500 dual-core processor. It is a highly optimized chip that handles sensor data and background tasks with a fraction of the electrical footprint. But the most significant revelation comes from the teardown analyses provided by the 5K runner. They discovered what Garmin actively chose to remove from the motherboard.
And this is the part that completely blew my mind.
In previous generations, like the Phoenix 6X Tro, the motherboard featured an external RAM chip, specifically a WinBond LPDDR chip. This RAM was used to buffer large amounts of data, particularly topographical maps, to ensure that when you panned across a map or scrolled through menus, the interface was snappy and responsive.
Like a modern smartphone.
Exactly. But in the current ultra-endurance generation, Garmin completely eliminated that external RAM chip. The watch now relies entirely on a tiny 5-megabyte block of memory built directly into the processor itself. Hang
on, I have to push back on this because from a consumer tech perspective, that sounds like a massive downgrade. You are telling me Garmin deliberately removed the RAM from a $1,000 premium watch.
They did.
Doesn't that make the interface laggy? Why would anyone accept a stuttering, slow watch interface when every smartphone on the planet is buttery smooth?
They removed it because an external RAM chip is a massive power hog. Keeping data instantly accessible in RAM requires a constant, steady flow of electricity. By eliminating it, the power savings are astronomical.
But the interface.
But you are absolutely right about the consequence. The user experience is visibly compromised. Map rendering is noticeably slower. When you zoom in on a topo map, you can literally watch the map tiles draw in one by one. The interface doesn't have that 60 frames per second buttery smooth glide you expect from modern electronics.
So they are essentially saying, we know this feels a bit clunky, but it's the only way you survive the weekend.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the target audience, Garmin knows exactly who they are building this for. They are building this for the ultra runner on hour 40 of a race. That athlete is exhausted, they are covered in mud, and their cognitive function is completely depleted. They do not care if a menu animation drops a few frames or if a map takes an extra second to render.
It just needed to work.
The only thing that matters in that moment of extreme fatigue is that the watch is still alive, the GPS track is still recording, and it is pointing them toward the finish line. Garmin deliberately sacrificed UI snappiness for raw, uncompromising endurance.
That is a fascinating design philosophy. It's utility over aesthetics.
Yeah. And
it's not just the processor and the RAM. The sources also highlight the evolution of the GPS hardware itself, specifically the move to the Synaptics SYN4778 GNSS chip.
This is a critical upgrade. GNSS chips are what communicate with the satellites in orbit to determine your exact location on Earth. Historically, this has always been the single biggest battery drain on any sports watch.
Naturally.
And when the industry introduced dual-frequency or multiband GPS, which connects to two different satellite frequencies simultaneously to eliminate errors from signals bouncing off canyon walls or tall buildings, it drained batteries even faster.
But the sources note that this specific Synaptics chip somehow breaks that rule. It manages to offer that pinpoint multi-band accuracy while actually consuming less power than the older single-frequency chips. It is a rare instance of getting a massive performance upgrade without paying a battery penalty.
It's the culmination of years of silicon optimization. When you combine all of these elements, a highly efficient MIP display that idles on static screens, a Gen 2 bezel solar array optimized by an MPPT algorithm, a processor that sips power, the ruthless elimination of power-hungry external RAM, and a hyper-efficient GPS chip, you create a device with a baseline power consumption so incredibly low that the ambient sunlight you encounter on a trail run is actually enough to sustain it indefinitely.
It is a perfect storm of efficiency.
Mm.
But as we all know, reality doesn't always cooperate with perfect engineering. What happens when the sun abandons you?
It happens to the best of us.
What if you are attempting a multi-day fast pack through the dense forest canopy of the Pacific Northwest, and it is pouring rain for 3 straight days? Solar isn't going to save you. You're going to need a physical charge.
That brings us to the practical realities of mid-race charging. And this is an area where the endurance community has had to get very creative. For over 5 years, the primary charging mechanism for these devices has been a proprietary 4-pin connector on the back of the watch.
Boy.
From an engineering standpoint, it makes sense. It allows for high-level waterproofing and takes up minimal internal space. But practically, it is a deeply flawed design.
Anyone who's owned one of these watches for more than a year knows exactly what you're talking about. You take the watch off after a run, it is covered in sweat, sunscreen, and trail dust. All of that grime gets compacted into that tiny port.
Yes, it does.
Eventually, the official cable stops making a solid connection. You plug it in, set it on your nightstand, and if you bump the table even slightly, it disconnects.
The physical awkwardness of a rigid cable sticking straight out of the back of a rounded watch case is a persistent frustration. But as DC Rainmaker highlights in his extensive accessory testing, the third-party market has stepped in to solve this. There are these small aftermarket charging pucks, brands like Moco make them, that completely change the experience.
I've seen these. They are essentially little flat docks that cost about $7 or $8. Instead of fighting with a cable, you just lay the watch flat onto the puck. And the best part, as the testing confirms, is that they work perfectly regardless of the orientation. You just drop the watch on it, the pins line up, and it charges reliably. They are absolute game changers for your desk at home.
They are excellent for daily life. But if you are out on a trail and your watch is flashing a 5% battery warning, a desk dog doesn't help you. This raises an important question. How do you keep the device alive without stopping your activity? Because the golden rule of ultra racing is forward progress. You do not want to sit at an aid station for an hour waiting for your watch to charge.
This is where the gear reviews from the 5K runner really caught my attention. They highlighted the new Garmin Mini battery bank introduced for the 2026 season. This piece of hardware is brilliantly tailored for this exact worst-case scenario. It is incredibly compact, roughly the size of a square Oreo cookie.
Very small.
And it holds a 1,200 milliamp hour charge. Now, compared to the massive battery banks you use for your laptop or phone, that sounds tiny. But for a highly efficient wearable, 1,200 milliamp hours is enough to fully charge an endurance watch from 0 to 100% 3 or 4 times over.
The capacity is excellent, but the operational capability is what makes it a vital piece of kit. You can plug this battery bank into the 4-pin connector on the watch, and it will deliver a charge while the watch is actively recording a GPS activity. It doesn't force the watch into a dormant charging mode.
Which is everything. You don't have to pause your 100-mile race, save the file, lose your continuous track, and start a new activity. You just plug it in and keep moving. But because it relies on that same standard 4-pin connector, there are some highly practical limitations. There is no strong magnetic attachment like you'd find on a smartphone. It's just friction holding it in place.
Correct. If you plug it in and start running down a technical, rocky descent, the vibration and arm movement will almost certainly rattle the battery bank loose. The connection simply isn't secure enough for aggressive movement.
Which leads to my absolute favorite detail from the endurance community. You have this $1,000 masterpiece of solar and silicon engineering, completely dependent on a 20-cent hair tie.
It's true.
Runners literally take a rubber band or a hair tie they borrow from an aid station and loop it tightly over the screen and around the battery bank to physically bind the pins together while they run. It's incredibly low-tech, but it works perfectly.
It is the ultimate pragmatic solution. However, our sources emphasize a critical safety warning regarding this exact practice that we need to pass along. If you are charging on the move, you cannot just strap the battery bank to the back of the watch and compress it directly against your skin while you run.
Why is that?
Because of the heat. Exactly. Lithium-ion batteries, when discharging energy rapidly to charge another device, generate substantial heat. They carry a small but very real risk of thermal runaway.
That sounds dangerous.
It is. If a lithium-ion cell becomes damaged or stressed by extreme heat, it can rapidly overheat and, in severe cases, catch fire. Taking a battery bank, plugging it in, and then trapping it tightly between the watch case and your sweaty, moving wrist with no airflow is a recipe for a thermal event.
Yikes. So what's the workaround?
The established safe protocol for mid-race charging is to keep the battery bank securely in a pocket on your hydration vest and run a longer, flexible charging cable down your sleeve to the watch.
That makes perfect sense. Keep the battery bank breathing in your pack. Let the watch do its job on your wrist. So we have covered an immense amount of ground today regarding how this technology actually functions in the wild. To summarize this perfect storm for you, Garmin achieves these staggering, infinite battery lifespans through a ruthless, vertically integrated design philosophy. They use highly efficient transflective MIP displays that leverage the sun instead of fighting it.
Right.
They pack dense Gen 2 solar arrays into the bezels and optimize them with advanced MPPT algorithms. They deliberately sacrifice high-speed, flashy user interfaces by removing external RAM to conserve massive amounts of power. And for the moments when the environment simply won't cooperate, they provide ultra-lightweight, on-the-go charging solutions to keep you moving forward.
It is a remarkable achievement in specialized engineering. They have looked at every single component of the device, from the physical glass to the silicon logic boards, and optimized them all toward a singular, uncompromising goal: extreme longevity in the harshest environments.
It really is a masterclass in knowing exactly what your user needs and what they're willing to give up to get it. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over regarding the future of this technology. We've spent this entire deep dive discussing how Garmin deliberately uses lower power, less vibrant MIP screens and slower interfaces to achieve this incredible endurance. Meanwhile, the broader consumer tech world is pushing for brighter, faster, more beautiful AMOLED screens.
They certainly are.
But what happens when those two philosophies collide? There's new display technology on the horizon called MicroLED. The promise of MicroLED is that it can offer the incredibly vivid colors, the deep blacks, and the high brightness of an AMOLED screen, but it requires a fraction of the electrical power to operate.
That would change everything.
Right. So here's the question to explore on your own. If engineers can successfully miniaturize MicroLED to the point where it draws almost no power, making solar charging viable for bright, beautiful displays, could we see the complete extinction of the MIP screen? Are we looking at a future in the 2030s where your endurance watch gives you that magical infinite battery life and a buttery smooth cinema-quality interface? Or is there something so inherently rugged, reliable, and perfectly suited to the outdoors about a sunlight-reflecting MIP screen that it will always remain the ultimate choice for the true off-grid purist?
It is going to be a fascinating evolution to watch unfold over the next few years.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into endurance tech. We highly encourage you to go check out the incredibly detailed, hands-on work over at the 5K Runner website and the phenomenal, rigorous data testing at DC Rainmaker site for your own explorations. Until next time, keep exploring the backcountry and keep your batteries charged.